Shall we talk a bit about Trump?
Why don't we? Well, the Orangery hoveth to. It is a great pleasure to be back with the mighty Andy Worthington, who's been... well, we could discuss some of his earlier labours today, later on. But first of all, the prospects for the next 4 years of the Sunday uplands of the glorious hinterland of the US of A.
Well, it's it's kind of unbelievable, isn't it? It's unbelievable that this man has managed to persuade the population yet again to vote for him, when he's just such a shambles. And it's very worrying because he's employed all of these, or he seems to want to employ all these people who seem to be uniquely untalented for the jobs that they're going to be assigned to. This collection of nut jobs, and most of them seem to be very rich.
I think they'd be dribbling with a Tesco bag, wouldn't they, on the night bus?
Yeah. And, I think it will be a disaster in all kinds of ways. But I also have the feeling that it will be very incoherent and that it might well fall apart. Because Donald Trump is not a coherent person. He's not
some dissembly, doesn't he, in many ways?
He's not a potential fascist leader with a clear plan. He's basically like the ultimate mafia boss, the ultimate gangster. And he'll fall out with people. I mean, I think it's already happening, even at the nomination stage, that he's already falling out with people and not even going to get the job. But I really fear for the collateral damage on the American people as this chaos unfolds. And I think on that point, we have to hope that there are enough aspects of the law that are robust enough to be able to challenge things. But who knows whether that's possible, or whether this is a kind of the start of a kind of degeneracy into civil war in the United States. That can the people manage to stand up for themselves against the complete failure and abuse of power by those who lead them. I mean, I would say, what Trump's going to demonstrate is like, well, we didn't like the Democrats because they were not actually very helpful at addressing the needs of the people, but nor is Trump. But he has such a cult around him that people seem to project onto him all manner of things that he's clearly not.
It's a messianic anger, almost, isn't it? Cast in medallion form. I've heard that Mitch McConnell, as the former leader of the Senate, is going to attempt to amass some people to be partially Trump whisperers, but partially do some of this countering that you suggested. Now, I mean, you may be saying, with friends like that, who needs enemies? But do you presumably the reason for all this assembly will be that there's money to be made out of it?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's always money. I mean, that's what it all comes down to, doesn't it? Competing money makers. Whichever faction manages to be ascendant in that is going to make all the money. So I don't know, because there's so many different aspects going on. I mean, he's the leader of a party that has moved far to the right from where the Republicans used to be. But he's not a unifying figure in that, because he doesn't fundamentally necessarily share any of the rabid beliefs that these actual elected senators and representatives have, because he's, uniquely self-serving, incomprehensibly incoherent in his own head, as far as I can see. The only things that I understand about Trump that are consistent, in other words, that, are not going to change, however big an envelope stuffed with cash you give him, are his horrendous attitude to women and his very fundamental racism. Everything else is like, is he pro-Israel? Is he anti-Israel? Is he pro this? Is he pro that? It all floats around as to who's going to make it worth his while.
Right. There's no ideology.
There's no ideology.
So, we have 4 years of this. Presumably the midterms will come up in a couple of years. What was your reading of Kamala Harris? It was said in another place this morning that fundamentally she simply didn't have enough time, and there was, perhaps at least passive misogyny at play there, because she was locked out of some of the important processes and the awareness of what needed to be said.
Well, there were a lot of things going on, weren't there? I mean, I'm sure misogyny and racism played a part. I think discontent, that's putting it mildly, towards the democratic government because of their stance on Gaza was significant. Not significant enough to have swung it, but more significant than just suggesting that it was Arab Americans.
Trump had two imams on stage saying, these are great people, and that was it. You know.
Well, he also, he also had Arab Americans voting for him.
Yes, yeah.
As though he was the lesser of two evils, when actually they're clearly both two evils. For one reason or another, they didn't provide a coherent enough message to the American people that they were helping them. And then on the other hand, what's happened is that people are in an illusory world where they believe that the far right is actually offering them something when they're just lying to them. I mean, but they have the more convincing message that they care. And I think actually it's very similar to what we've got here, which is that we have a numbing, uninspiring, neoliberal government in the Labour Party led by Keir Starmer, who can't offer anything inspiring to the people at all, because they have nothing inspiring to offer. They're neoliberals, they're warmongers, they have almost nothing left that represents the left, which would be historically and realistically the political movement that is concerned about the people as a whole. It's like there's a huge gap being created by the evisceration of the left by the centre, both with the Democrats and with the Labour Party, and the void that has created is being filled by far right populists who claim that they stand for the people and who manage to make more of a song and dance about it that can look appealing to certain people, although usually, through dog whistles like racism. But we're in a mess for that, I think, and I don't know whether you think the same, Andy, but they're so uninspiring, this Labour government, and their popularity is just plummeting.
Well, it probably bears out what you're saying, Andy, but I gather that in the past couple of days, Reform have very convincingly won some by-elections in what was the Red Wall.
Yeah.
So they have displaced the Tories.
Yeah, I mean, I think for those of us who are worried about the ascendancy of the far right, we may be safer than we think in Britain, simply because Reform and the Tories both exist. However much Reform is going to take votes from the Tories, there is a rump of Tory voters who are not going to go for that, I suspect.
So the Badenoch, J.D. Vance connection, Farage beginning to make noises about limiting abortion.
Well, it could be that Badenoch destroys the Tories, because she really is the worst possible example. I mean, she's insanely far right, but she's also black, so she's going to not be somebody that the racists want, however much she works at pretending that doesn't matter, and that so I don't know exactly how it's going to go, but I mean, the problem that we have, that everybody seems to have, is that we have no viable options that can actually hold power. I mean, we spoke about the elections in summer. One of the interesting things about that was the rise of the third parties. So quite significant recovery by the Liberal Democrats, who are clearly now to the left of Labour. And obviously managing to get some Green MPs, the independent MPs that started to come through. There's obviously, the SNP still, and there's Plaid Cymru, and there's a growing group of MPs who represent something that is to the left of the established parties and the Johnny-come-lately Reform Party. Labour, the Tories, Reform. The best you could say about any of them is that they're centre-right. And you just start going further and further to the right. That doesn't represent the view of the majority of the people. So I would hope that into this void something will happen, but I think it involves us, the people, finding new ways to take on broken political systems, and I just don't know whether anything is going to trigger that. You know, what I've been watching, and I'm sure you have as well over this summer, is catastrophic flooding impacting on countries in Western Europe, where
Wales, for one,
where we're supposed to be safe.
Yes.
The only place that I've seen people rise up is Valencia, but the people of Wales should rise up because they have been abandoned by governments relentlessly, who are not concerned about the fact that catastrophic climate change is here and that Wales is just the first place. It's going to be impacting more and more and more places as time goes on. And the answer to that needs to be to do something. You know, I'm wondering where reality collides with the dismissal of reality. So, you know, in general, all of our political systems around the world are pretending that catastrophic climate change doesn't exist, or that it can somehow be deferred, or that by pretending it doesn't exist, that will somehow make it go away. I mean, we've never been in a position like this in human history, that something so huge and unstoppable, which is the climate of this planet, turning against our ability to survive it through our own actions, cannot be deferred, cannot be argued with, cannot be run away from. And the more that becomes apparent to people, because, you know, their homes are wiped out, their livelihoods are wiped out, I think I think it's pretty certain that we're going to start seeing food shortages. Already, I think a lot of the crops from this year will be way down. So prices are going to start going through the roof for various things next year. On every front, it's unavoidable. So I'm waiting for that reality to impact on people, where they can no longer say, "Oh, what's the point? The government's rubbish, but they're all rubbish, aren't they?" Because if you like, that's the position that we've been in for decades, where however bad they are, their uselessness isn't going to that much materially affect your existence.
And so it is itself for their argument for small government, isn't it? You know, saying we are fallible, bless us, Father, for we have sinned, and then off they carry on.
Yeah.
There was a Harvard prof talking about the Democrats. I forget his name now, but it's suggesting that the answer seemed to lie in a sort of hyper-localism, which I suppose points to what you're saying about these minority parties. I come down here and I sort of notice it on the streets. This is a very activist neighbourhood, just in terms of being socially activist.
Yeah.
Which is presumably why you're here. Is that the sort of thing that you would see developing?
Yeah, I suppose I would. I mean, the reason I'm here is because, you know, I live in social housing, and a place turned up 25 years ago, which is in a very nice neighbourhood, but it was a lot poorer then.
Yeah.
That was before the whole rise of the housing boom and the housing bubble, and Broccoli's now a desirable place to live.
It's a certain, to use an old school word, there's a certain house proudness, if that's the great expression about this. I mean, it's beautifully kept.
Yeah, I mean, this is a nice place. I mean, you know, as you know, Andy, I live up the road from Deptford, and I like Deptford because Deptford is one of the is genuinely, in a lot of ways, one of the last vibrant working class neighbourhoods in London. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the southeast. It's quite interesting, and it may be that one of the things that has created that has been that it was kind of one of the last places where the money started rushing in. But I think, I actually think that localizing politics for change it seems like it's a possibility.
Yeah, people here didn't sell up and run. They stayed because they like it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm wondering about that. I've met a few people recently, who talking about trying to get assemblies together. I mean, it was, one of the hopes of Extinction Rebellion, but it's actually, there's a lot of grassroots left politics trying to work out how to get together to address the real issues. Because one of the voids in political life is that, as we can see again from the Labour government, is they say nothing, they promise nothing, they do nothing. So much of politics now is conducted in terms of sound bites, a complete refusal to address the real issues.
Virtue signaling.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think you can't really do that forever without something happening. Yeah. So, as we were saying earlier, part of the way that can be, unfortunately, manipulated is that far-right populists come along. But, hopefully they won't get their way, because they will, in the end, undoubtedly let everyone down. But a constructive way of trying to restructure our lives, maybe it could start at a local level. I mean, you could imagine, it's not too far-fetched, to imagine that people start meeting up to discuss what's important. You could find a few people that are capable of carrying that somehow, articulating it, that you could then start challenging the councils who are responsible for so much of our neighbourhoods as to whether they work or not. Now, there's a bigger picture beyond the councils of central government and their role. But to me, it seems possible that it would be going back, in a way, to the kind of early days of unions and the labour movement, when, the reason things changed was because people got together in vast numbers to take on the vested interests. And in terms of where we're at now, with a handful of exceptions, I would say that most councils are closed, complacent, failing to have any vision or energy about how they could run their boroughs better. And each borough in London is roughly serving, 250,000 people? I mean, each borough in London is the size of a town or a city in itself. And so often not adequately serving the needs of those people.
Yeah. They used to say London was a city of villages, didn't they?
Now it's a city of cities.
The scary thought. Gotham City and all that. So, do you feel then, at the moment, that Extinction Rebellion is something of a busted flush, because they've as it were, weeded out the troublemakers at the top for a bit? Or do you think that this could evolve into something that has perhaps a broader appeal?
Well, okay, so I mean, the climate movement has secured a victory in the sense that the pledge for there to be no new oil and gas is actually quite significant. I mean, there's still battles to overcome, so existing oil and gas plans have to be revoked, like with Rosebank. But it is actually a victory. The problem that we have in this country, I mean, there are two problems. One is the huge power of the fossil fuel denial, the climate change denial lobby. And some of that isn't even about lobbying. It's that a lot of people are so resistant to change. They're clinging bitterly and violently even to the certainties of the world that they love. Because it's a huge thing that we have to take on board, is that everything that has materially improved our lives over the last 40 years, from when we were younger, growing up in the 70s and the 80s, to what's happened, a kind of alleged economic miracle over the last 40 years, is all based on over-exploitation of our resources. It's killing us, literally. The way we've been living, the fact that we can have what we want, that everything is so brilliant, is killing us.
There's no afterlife for it, though.
So that's a problem. But but a more specific problem in terms of activism is the fact that the Tory government enacted the most punitive anti-protest laws of any country in the West.
Yeah, if you and I were sitting at a park bench in the summertime, we could potentially have been arrested. That's loony, wasn't it? Yeah. But
the fact that people are in prison for 4 or 5 years. Serving 4 or 5 year sentences for environmental protests. The fact that if you step off the road for 10 seconds to try and slow down traffic, you can be arrested, prosecuted, sent to prison. There's a report just come out. The sentencing in this country is 3 times more punitive than it is anywhere else. So that's a paralysis of the ability of people to take non-violent direct action protest.
And these cases appear to be prioritised in a sort of a struggling court system as well.
Yes. Well, I mean, there's a notorious very right-wing judge who's been particularly punitive towards the environmental protesters. They've got a collective court case. There are 20 of them in prison, and they're challenging it. All 20 of them have been allowed to challenge it collectively. That's happening in January. So that could be significant.
Yeah.
But yeah, the bigger issue, I mean, which XR has been looking at for years, and I think Just Stop Oil are looking at, a lot of the groups are looking at the fact that we have to get more people on board to recognise, if people can go beyond the denial or beyond the hiding, which I saw an Australian environmental writer recently writing about how what the denial, what the inability to cope with what's happening is doing is it's creating a numbness in people. They know that it's terrible, but they can't acknowledge it. So this is not the deniers. This is the people who are stuck in this place that humanity's never been in.
Well, you spoke about mental health and leadership last time. This is mental health in the general public.
And he called it a numbness. And I thought, there's something actually quite accurate about that. That I can see people going through the motions. And I'm pretty sure that at some level, they know they're going through the motions. It's not substantive, pretending to live like we did 10, 20 years ago, as though it's the same. It's not. At some level, it's a charade. So what's waiting to come out is what would happen to us mentally, and the more people are involved, the better, if we collectively could understand when we're on the edge of a disaster, but we're also on the edge of a new world in which we could behave differently. Yeah. And actually, a lot of those things could be very positive. I haven't really met anybody, Andy, who through those lockdown times, which were awful in so many ways, in terms of loneliness, in terms of economic damage to certain, in so many ways, also was a time when everything got quieter and the frenzy of everything stopped. I haven't met anybody who doesn't appreciate that there was something about that was good. No. And as soon as we could, we went straight back to how everything was, and we're back to the frenzy and the
enjoined to by some politician.
And a lot of that calmness was because the world was quieter and cleaner. Yeah. It was, because we are the polluters. We are the ones waging war on ourselves through the climate. And if we could see that things could be different and better, that could actually be a good thing. So it's one of the things I'm hoping will happen in 2025 is that people get together more to have a good time together more without overconsumption, by trying to actually physically create a place that people will want to be in. It's like, what are those guys doing? It's like, these are all the people who are environmentally clued up. They're having a nice time together. Yeah. They're having an interesting time together. They're talking about things. They're talking about the way they can make things better. Could be. Yeah.
Well, we were talking just as I arrived today about this tremendous diversity of live music venues here, for example, where, certainly through the forefathers and your kindred, discussions are had about what, I suppose, broadly speaking, protest song, which has always been a thing in folk culture, hasn't it?
Yeah.
So you go to one of your gigs or such like, and you're in a certain frame of mind.
Well, I hope that's the case. I mean, it's
inevitable.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and we've had a few very nice gigs recently, and I mean, it's interesting. It's all about comparisons between places, because in some ways I don't think things have really recovered after COVID in terms of live culture in all kinds of ways.
Do you mean people's readiness to engage with it when they wouldn't normally?
Well, I think there are less venues. There are people not going out as much. Maybe there is also, of course, increasing poverty, because let's not pretend every year, a larger percentage of the population of London, of anywhere else in this country, is getting poorer. Genuinely. I mean, it's not rocket science, is it?
Often be on a bike and all weathers looking at this happening.
But I mean, most people's wages aren't changing, but the costs of their food, the costs of their bills, the costs of their rent, everything. Of course, there's increasing poverty happening all the time. So a combination of all these factors mean that I don't think that the live scene across the arts is hugely healthy, but it's interesting that you say that it's livelier here in Southeast London than it is in some other places, because I'm sure that's true.
Yeah.
I know that in certain kind of suburban or semi-suburban context, there's not really anything happening. It's maybe it's part of the problem of what we're identifying is that everything is still within a capitalist context. And one of the disturbing things that happened as a result of the lockdown is that obviously everything closed. People who were running retail or cultural spaces may have had a little bit of a break. Nobody got a Jubilee write-off of everything at the end. I know loads of people who've had to close down what they're doing because their landlords are coming after them saying, you owe us, £80,000 in back rent. Implausible situation, which is just shutting things down, and they're not even necessarily being replaced. I mean, the way the Archco is behaving, that's exactly what they're doing. The giant company that took over all of the railway arches.
There you have the gentrification of Brixton, for example.
Yeah. But I mean, places are closing down and they're not being replaced by anything new because it's so hard to run anything.
Yeah.
So there's another community angle here of we need more community spaces that are able to stand outside of the most kind of rabid capitalism, because that's becoming ever more expensive and unaffordable and unable to provide for us.
You put me in mind, the noble effort at Tyburn a little while ago, but also the squatters movement, whereby, there are situations of housing all like that mansion in NW3 where the landlord was distinctly absent, where they just got over the line, they now own the place and run it cooperatively in the most unlikely situation.
Well,
so often these places are better managed, aren't they? When the economics dictate that a rebuild can't happen for some period of time, they're still valuable dwelling spaces. We have a housing shortage.
Yeah. All of that has gone horribly, hasn't it, Andy? I mean, we know that. If you were around in the 70s and the 80s when, before property first went through the roof, when there was so much stuff that was empty, housing co-ops came out of the squatting movement. Co-ops for all kinds of things. Look around London. Whenever you see an interesting place, like there's a nature reserve down by Greenwich Peninsula. I know that was created at a time before that land became stratospherically expensive, artificially, that somebody got in there who cared about wildlife and established it, and it's unerasable now, despite the fact that the area that it's in is worth,
the spirit of time.
But those things are everywhere. When you look for them, are community projects that are now deeply embedded in their neighbourhoods, which were created by, visionary people in the 70s, the 80s, even into the 90s. So,
ironically, they are pools for gentrification.
There is that. But you can't, there's nothing you can do about that.
Yes, sure.
I mean, you take a rundown neighbourhood, make it interesting, and then it gets gentrified.
It is, I was with an ex-girlfriend of mine yesterday. God knows how she put up with me, but it's one of the last remaining integrated co-ops at a place called Brandon's Wharf, and just on the river there.
Okay,
But you walk in there and you sense that, to me, there's always a sense of William Morris and hanging plants everywhere, and this is a repurposed industrial space. I think it was a sort of transit point for various goods off the river.
Right.
Yeah. And this is how a neighbourhood like that is fashioned. So I suppose, again, in the Mauritian dream, you have the revival of craft skills, of people who can make things and rebuild things. I think in Wandsworth we had the Albadian community who were kicked out by General Zia, who set about rebuilding a neighbourhood.
Right.
Whilst technically being unable to work, they did it for charitable purposes. It was
Right.
a mosque, All of these skills, to me, are latent in the British character.
Yeah.
The men's shed movement and so on, also.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, and I suppose that now we're discussing this, then one of the keys to it is really genuinely to make things affordable. So it's fine. We have to find places and spaces outside of where capitalism is now to enable people to pursue all of these things. I mean, if you like, we only have to look back to the 80s, Andy. We know that, for all the people who signed on the dole and lived in a squat who did nothing, there were musicians and artists and all manner of creative people. Who that was how they got started.
They made the space they could work in.
I mean, I watched a documentary last year, probably it was, about the artist movement of the early '90s in the UK, and because the housing bubble, there was a little one under Thatcher and it collapsed. The housing bubble, as we know it now, really began in about 1998. In that period. All of these artists, I mean, people who are, well famous today, people who are having raves, I mean, everything was happening because there was a vast amount of warehouse space for nothing. Yeah. Creativity came along with it because if you've got nothing to start with, you can't do anything.
Yeah.
And it's why, no offence to them, but it's why so many well-heeled people are now doing quite well. In so many artistic fields, because if your mum and dad are rich, then they can help you. But it's increasingly hard for people with nothing. I would say that the main places that still exists, a lot of it is in the squatting scene. It still exists. They can't squat in houses, but they squat in industrial places, and they have to be very organised. And some of that is alive there because it's the only place you can be when you don't have money, and what are you supposed to do if you have irregular income? I mean, the streets are full of homeless people, as you know. The streets are full of homeless people because the costs of living were high and persistent, and what happened to them was their life fluctuated as so many do in a casualised economy, and then they just hit the buffers. And the next thing you know, they're in a doorway.
I believe it's still the case. It's not quite homelessness, but in Fulham, for example, the vast majority of food bank users are people who've paid the kids' school fees but can't afford to eat, having paid the mortgage. It's bizarre. But that was the case 20 years ago. I believe it still is. You don't see this.
No, that's a weird one.
Isn't it? And you realise how well-heeled these voices are, and they say, well, this has been our experience too, until we got this little part-time number and volunteered as well. So it's, in a sense, it comes back to your point about denial, doesn't it? In the face of what the right wing is doing in the name of populism. And the fact that most of us are in a rather paradoxical, peculiar place on what the psephologists think the continuum is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And on that level, I think that's why it's hard for me to imagine that there aren't going to be changes because there's a very turbocharged, high-level, profit-making group of interests, of companies, of corporations, willingly supported by politicians, where it's all about the profits of individuals and companies at the expense of everybody else. And when you start looking at how many people are being betrayed by this, it's a vast, vast number of people. So, hopefully something will start to happen that that people will come together to take that on. You
think of the bad planning decisions, funnily enough, also by a Labour government in the 70s and 80s, the T-Down, Smith, Paulson era, and the fact that notionally atomised people, put them in these tower blocks, they then started to fall apart, the lifts didn't work, and they didn't know their neighbours, which is a situation so often in London generally now, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think what actually happened with a lot of those places is that although although it can be said that it happened quite often, that it atomized and destroyed communities of people who've been living in, terraced, essentially slum housing.
Yeah, albeit in abject poverty.
But I think what's happened since then is that actually a lot of these places have become communities, have adapted as time has gone on.
I think you're right.
Because the gentrifiers, their fixation is with identifying the worst problems of estates and fixing them in time as though they're not something that evolves. So we all know the 1970s and the 1980s were a time of poverty and violence. I don't think we live in the same times. And I think Margaret Thatcher introduced right to buy. If you go to an estate, then a large number of those properties on that estate are not they're not council tenants that you can demonise because that's still with us. The demonisation of people who dare to live in social housing. It's not that. Loads of these flats are owned by people, and people are living in there, creating a new mixed community of people in places that, if they've survived this long, are quite often quite functional. But the lie has been to say that they're all dreadful, because what they want is to build the new estates, which actually, for the most part, do really seem to be dreadful.
Yeah, well, this is the Tybell argument, because it's been replaced by what my dad would call the secret police barracks.
Well, what they seem to be now is just little egg boxes of atomised apartments where the possibility of having any sense of a community is even more remote than it was when those estates were when council estates were built that were affordable in the 60s and the 70s. I think what's being built now, but is all for profit, is worse in terms of atomization and community. I don't think. I think it offers very, very little, and it's counting on the fact that people are atomized. That they live in a flat, they don't have any storage space. You're not supposed to own anything. All you're supposed to own is a phone, and and a few clothes. And you're supposed to go out all the time, and you're supposed to travel across London and not care about geography or neighbourhoods or your local community. And it's an atomised model that breaks down in a lot of ways. You can be atomised, in the sense of how people live now to how they did, 30 years ago. You can be atomised in the sense that we are all in London. So many people are moving about so much more. Yeah, we've got a better integrated transport network, and it's and people are literally going there's something happening, over on the other side of town. Let's go and do it. Yeah, that's all okay, but you actually also need a neighbourhood and a community where people belong. Yeah. Otherwise things don't really hold.
It's the idea of home where you sort of know your neighbours and you can look after next door's cat and things, simple, non-political things like that are just a matter of basic agreements and basic relationship.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's quite a necessary glue. I think we've run into dangers through atomization. And part of that is, you see atomization all the time. You have to go out. Yeah. No one's aware of anything happening around them because they're on their phones or they're listening to stuff.
It surprises me, sorry to interrupt you, that actually anywhere in London, if I get lost, if I've left the A to Z at home, nobody knows very much beyond the next street.
No, right.
It's like it bears out they just arrived here or they're passing through.
Yeah.
What's that about?
Yeah.
Doesn't anybody live here? Yeah, quite. Could we talk a little bit about Syria somewhat? Because there's an example of a place that has been, as with others we might come on to, has been sort of bombed into oblivion. The Israelis have chucked some more missiles at some of the bases with their usual deep sensitivity and consideration. And there is the task of building a new community and building cohesion. And it strikes me that people from that part of the world, I suppose by strength of character and necessity, are quite good at this. But how do you see all this panning out, given that there's a lot of fingers on a lot of pies?
Okay. I mean, the first thing that I would have to say about Syria, and I've got a Syrian friend whose brother was killed in one of the Assad dynasty's torture prisons.
The ones they're just uncovering now.
So the Assad regime was brutal almost beyond belief in terms of running an arbitrary, indiscriminate prison system containing vast amounts of people who were horrendously abused, who were killed in vast numbers in the most horrible ways, to literally terrorize a population into submission. That's what they've been living through for generations. So as far as I can see, the end of that regime is to be celebrated. It absolutely has to be. I've been looking at America's horrendous, lawless prison for Muslims at Guantanamo Bay, and I've done work on the CIA black site torture program that happened. That was a bad thing,
Playbook is a playbook, I suppose.
I've done a little bit of work on Israel's horrendous prison system for Palestinians, and I know that it's not just in the Arab world; it's not just Syria. But it's Egypt, it's other countries, but that was absolutely horrific.
Seems to be kind of political psychology. I mean, sorry to interrupt you. You get the Assad's father-in-law living in East Acton. They've just gone away, drove very fast. Places now, and you couldn't make it up, could you? Just on Western Avenue.
Well, I mean,
giving him instructions to have the clamp down even more.
Britain's a great haven for rich foreign despots, isn't it?
Yeah.
Unless suddenly something changes. I mean, when Russia invaded Ukraine, if you want a humorous example of that, it's like okay, well, all the government was implicated on every level. Boris Johnson, particularly, with rich Russians, and then suddenly, just loads of people were just having to leg it. Having been told, come here, you'll be safe, because we don't care what you've done, so long as you got money. Yeah. With Syria, I don't know what's coming next, and obviously the whole Syrian civil war was such a difficult and monstrous story. It seemed to me it was a proxy world war. That so many nations were fighting through Assad, supporting him while he killed and brutalized and terrorized and murdered such a huge number of his own people, and created the refugee crisis, particularly in 2015. The largest component of that. I mean, so much of that story is the result of our wars creating refugees, but he created this huge wave of refugees, which then led, I think, to Brexit in the UK because it coincided. I think it led to, single-handedly to the massive increase of racism that we're still living with. It's the rise of the far right I could attribute almost entirely, above everything else, to the huge Syrian refugee problem that Assad created, of driving so many of his own people out of his own country. So there's the good news. This man has gone. But the rest of the story I'm kind of troubled by. Turkish involvement in the north. Obviously, Russia backing off for whatever strategic reasons that was. Iran backing off. Some assessments that's because, how much Iran has been damaged. I'm not sure that I would agree with either of those in terms of Russia or Iran. I think that I don't think that they were close friends with Assad. I think it was strategic geopolitics.
Who was funding him?
Who, Assad?
Yeah.
Well, I know that he had some support from Russia, didn't he?
Yeah.
But what we've got now, obviously, unfortunately, is a situation where I don't think that we can trust the Islamists who now seem to be in the ascendancy in Syria. It may be that they're led pragmatically by somebody who understands the need to become politically moderate and to it may be. I mean, there's the two parties involved. So there's a Turkish-backed aspect of the story, and there's also like a huge number of Syrian people who would really like something horrible not to happen, So it's kind of up in the air. But what worries me is the influence of Israel and the United States on what's happening in Syria. Because, of course, the withdrawal in any way of Russia and Iran then made it,
creates a void, doesn't
a
it?
place that they can plunder and attempt to control. And this is in the US's interest in the sense that all the US seems to live for. I mean, almost genuinely, the government, its main driver, one of its main drivers seems to be to engage endlessly in pointless wars that are not going to improve anything.
Well, instead of Israel,
but at the moment, what's particularly happening, because I would regard the United States as a colony of Israel now, I would regard most of the West as having been colonized by Israel, is that this benefits Israel, and in the most disturbing manner. So Gaza, an actual genocide is happening. A country is trying to exterminate the entire people of this area without any attempt by the West still to stop it or to acknowledge fundamentally how wrong it is. Emboldened by that, they then started doing the same thing to Lebanon. And what underpins this, Andy, is a lie that is being tolerated, which is, in Gaza, it's essentially everyone's Hamas. There's no one innocent. And in Lebanon, you could almost see it more clearly, because they started blowing up tower block after tower block of residential homes in Beirut. And it's like, what? Are Hezbollah people living there? It was a lie. They're bombing hospitals again. They're terrorizing and trying to kill as many people as possible, pretending that essentially everyone is connected to the organization that they're going after. So it was Hamas, it was Hezbollah, and Syria falls, and what do? They indulge in hundreds and hundreds of military strikes to take out every aspect of Syria's defensive capability, with also the US involved in strikes on Syria. Well, between, going east from Syria, there's northern Iraq, and then there's Iran.
Yeah.
Now, my fear is that all of these lunatics, by which I primarily mean Israel and the United States, and this could get much worse under Trump, they want that. They want to Gaza-ify Iran, as they demonstrated to some extent with what they did in Lebanon, that all of the rules have now been broken. All of the rules of proportionality in warfare, where it's like, hang on, guys, terrible things always happen in war, and civilians are always killed. But the template that you have now given us in Gaza is that you don't even care anymore. You don't even pretend anymore.
Yeah, scorched earth.
You're just murdering civilians, hundreds of them every day in Gaza. And if somebody asks you, you'll go, "It was a military target. There was somebody from Hamas. Yeah. Maybe there wasn't. Oh, sorry." And it's like, really? You want to do that to Iran? Because the mentality is now so fixed that all of the Iranian people are enemies. All of the Iranian people are terrorists, because that's what they've got away with. And so this is a scale of intended warfare at a level that we haven't seen. I mean, you'd have to go back to Vietnam, I think, to some of the truly, truly monstrous things that America did in Vietnam and in the neighboring countries. But this isn't Afghanistan. This isn't Iraq. This is a whole new level of horrors that Israel and the West are with a straight face and regardless of their political background, telling you is this new world, and with Russia and Ukraine in there as part of the story that preceded this and that's carrying on. I think it's absolutely terrifying.
Yeah. It also amounts, I suppose, effectively to blatant Islamophobia, doesn't it, really? I mean, in cultural terms. What's your assessment of the... Well, I think, again, another commentator I heard the other night, I think on Al Jazeera, was talking about the fact that Trumpian isolationism is going to create as it were, a Eurasian state that could amass sufficient firepower and sufficient cultural noggin to I suppose offer a significant threat, possibly that greater than China, I think is what was proposed.
Right, okay. I mean, obviously, sadly, America's got a lot of weapons, but they're increasingly isolated from the rest of the world, outside of Europe and the West. And there are powerful countries there, and there is China as well, which, doesn't want to get embroiled in the kind of pattern of persistent warmongering, which is American.
But
the American
particularly
model.
do that, do they? Surprisingly enough.
No. They've just
economic power.
Yeah. Well, exactly. So yeah, I don't know what's going to happen. The thing about Trumpian isolationism is that's his message. But he's surrounded himself with warmongers. There are many Americans who would be really happy if he stopped America's wars abroad. But he says that, but that's not what is the belief of the party that he represents. So again, when it comes to Trump, it's like, well, I don't know. Is he thinking this through? At some level, it wouldn't surprise me if he comes out with, an investment in beach holdings in Gaza, which means that everybody has to be eliminated quicker than the previous plan was.
Or become golf caddies.
Even though on some other day he might say the opposite. But the Republican Party, its elected representatives, are no less dangerous internationally than the Democrats were. So the notion of isolationism, to me, seems absurd. It seems like the biggest, most monstrous soundbite. It will be America first, and we're just going to look after ourselves. I don't see it happening. I mean, it would be better for the world if it did happen, but I just don't see it.
Yeah.
And Iran, I think, is the big fear because, I think the Republicans are worse on that than the Democrats. What are you doing, guys? This is a country that with an absolutely huge population of people. This is no pushover. This is a country that I think knows how to defend itself, but they will know how to defend themselves if you really come after them.
Yeah. So in that sense, Netanyahu et al. May have bitten off more they can chew. Well, I mean,
I think there's got to be some point where their overreach becomes apparent, Andy, because they're only able to do everything that they do because they're lavishly supplied with money and arms by the West. Sustaining a military presence in any kind of way is difficult for them. We saw that in Lebanon. They got kicked out.
Yes.
They're only good at bombing people from afar.
Yeah.
And that, if you don't mind, would feeds into what I think is one of the biggest problems that we're all facing, which is that the people who are making life hell on earth the most are giant corporations whose profits are inconceivable. The amount of profits that the arms companies of the world are making and have been over the last 14 months are through the roof. All of this is actually being conducted for the profits and the shareholders of the arms companies in the same way that the destruction of a livable climate is being pursued for the profits of the oil and gas companies. That has to start becoming more and more apparent that there's not even a pretense of ideology. Yeah. This is just profits.
Do you think it will, in the context of this overreach that you see coming down the pike?
I'm interested. I mean, what comes up on my social media every now and then is that there are a few on-the-ground reporters, by which I mean independent people with phones and cameras, recording the absolute devastation left behind by the storms and the hurricanes in America, for which it seems not a single cent of US money is being spent, while every week you see a story of how they're sending billions and billions abroad to continue their wars. I don't see that. I don't see that lasting forever. And so, but I mean, it's a speculative area at the moment, isn't it? You know,
it's a very interesting.
Donald Trump has been voted in by people who are incapable of seeing the difference between reality and their illusions. If he lets them down, as I'm pretty certain he will they notice, or are they too caught up in their fantasy? If they notice, then I think trouble is coming, because they're being starved to enable the United States government to bomb to death people in other countries. There's no relevance to them.
There will be a limit to which they could be impressed by the foreign ambition.
You would hope so, especially because there is that, you know, you identified it at the beginning of our discussion about this. There's essentially an America First component to a lot of the backing for Trump.
Yeah.
You know, which he certainly at times encouraged, yeah? You know, we need to look after ourselves. And it's a big part of American political thought in a way that I'm not sure everyone in Britain fully understands, that libertarianism, which runs across the political spectrum in the States, and isn't totally, you know, tied into the party system, is about isolating America from all of these foreign escapades. It is about not being involved in them.
Yeah, that shining city on the business. But
you know, you've got a right, what appears to be a right-wing anti-war position. That involves a lot of people in the States, and that's a hard one for us to get here. You know, it's a different political mentality.
I suppose, in the sense that the CIA is a private contractor. Then there are people like Halliburton who work closely with the military, should we say? To some extent, it's a commercial enterprise dressed up in combat fatigues.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's why I was talking about the arms industries and the amount of money they make. It's not just American companies, but they have got some extremely profitable American companies. But you remember, Dick Cheney lost his job when Clinton came in, and he went and became, you know, one of the top people in Halliburton. And then when Bush got in and he had an opportunity to start waging war again, he's employing Halliburton. I mean, he's making money as the defense secretary out of his former, the company that he just worked with just before, coincidentally.
The good old revolving door. No, that was his mystery twin brother, wasn't it? Yeah.
And it was a Halliburton. Subsidiary that made a lot of Guantanamo as well, which is.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's hopefully only going to be one of those, although with the jury's out on that, because on day one, as the phrase has it, Trump is talking about trying to deport people into various military detaining facilities. Yeah,
I would hope that that's going to be as much of a disaster as we would all hope in our brighter moments. I mean, it's so horribly wrong and horrific and counterproductive. You know, when we had the option to do something incredibly stupid, we just went and put an X in a box on a referendum on the 23rd of June 2000 and what was it? 16.
Something like that.
The Brexit referendum.
Yes.
No. We don't want any foreigners under any circumstances at all. This is going to sort it out. We didn't have the notion that these people would be imprisoned in vast numbers in camps. Or the knock-on effect, which is almost instantaneous, that nobody would be doing the jobs then because you've imprisoned them in the camps. The people who were, you know, looking after your grandma in the last days of her life, the people who are picking the fruit and the vegetables that you need to eat. I mean, it's absurd. But it's coming from the same Brexity place. I hate foreigners. We must be rid of them all, and don't come to me whinging with your stories about what they do for us. It's idiotic. You know, the answer, as we've seen in Britain over the last 8 years, and it's got a lot quieter now, would be people saying, well, British people should just do those things instead.
Yeah.
And it turns out that they haven't miraculously appeared to do those jobs. So if that's not a real proposal, then we're dependent on immigration. And if that's the case, then the immigrants are doing the jobs. So the last thing that you need is Trump. And I would suspect what will also happen very, very quickly is that the financial impact on the United States economy will be huge. And they deserve it all.
Yeah. So, of this creative destruction, it's going to be a limping along sort of 4 years. How are you, as we look forward to the new year, how certain are you of our relative progress over here under Starmer? And I'm putting that in very heavy quotation marks.
I think we're just treading water in the UK until until we work out in how many ways to come together to address the fact that they are completely useless and that there is no alternative. Nothing's happening. They're not going to privatise water. There's
been a mighty protest demand just out this very week, hasn't
there? Well, they need to, and it doesn't matter how much it costs. And then it's more than that. They need to then start employing the cleverest and most dedicated lawyers that they can find to start accusing people who have taken over privatised industries and ruined them deliberately of crimes. They're crimes. But, we need more than we've seen on every front. We need to. My opinion about the Starmer government after what are we on now? August, September, was it 5 months?
Something like that.
They stand for Israel first. They stand for total war second. They are authoritarian. They have no interest really in doing much to address climate issues in a way that is necessary. They have no vision whatsoever for how to provide affordable housing for the people of this country. It just goes on and on. It goes on and on. I mean, this is without me even taking it much darker as to how Starmer appeared with the head of BlackRock, which is the largest asset controller in the world, to basically, it seems, say, we need money, we haven't got any, you've got it all. How about if we let you have Britain as an investment? So you give us a few of the things that we need as little, as little rewards, but you own it all. I mean, I think their failure is so huge that they are legitimately thinking the only way that we can make everything even carry on is to privatise our country and give it to a major international operator,
as we hear Ukraine has in prospect.
Well, they're not alone. I mean, it's like why would you want to be the first in the queue? But if you look back through our history, why did we want to be the first in the queue in 1979 when we got Margaret Thatcher? And Margaret Thatcher said, we need neoliberalism. We need to free up. It's like, sorry, excuse me, what do we need to free up? Well, by destroying livelihoods and industries, we need to free up the right for rich people to create a new world in which they can get richer beyond anyone's dreams, to return us to the levels of inequality that we had in the Gilded Age, the levels of inequality that we had at the start of the 20th century before the First World War. Yeah. And we're there. Yeah. And the CEO of a monstrous US healthcare system has just been murdered.
I was actually going to make reference to that.
The amount of support that guy's got, I mean, I'm not advocating anything, but what's interesting is the amount of support from people who are like, well, what did this person do to deserve to have the position that he had?
I wonder, I don't know, have you heard about the financial specifics? Apparently the Mangione family own sort of luxury resorts and casinos. That's their trade. In some way, United Health perhaps had some of their commercial imperatives over a barrel, so that you have commerce v commerce.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, I suppose more is going to come out. But, just what interested me was the fact that I think amongst a lot of people, there isn't any sympathy for the fact that somebody has taken out somebody whose value to the rest of humanity is non-existent. Yeah. He had made a fortune as the head of a company that makes money by making as many people as miserable as possible in terms of health, and has killed who knows how many people. So these are the areas that it becomes philosophically interesting, because these are the same areas that climate defiants, who I pay attention to, who are young, very aggressive climate campaigners in the US. In a way that when I see them in operation, I just think, wow, British people really are generally quite quiet. And they storm into meetings with paid lobbyists and with oil and gas industry leaders, and in their faces they accuse them of being mass murderers, and because they are, and because they are. This is the place that we're at. If you're the head of a company that has lied to the public for 30, 40, 50, 60 years, because you did the research to know that what you're doing is making the climate uninhabitable. And when you did it, they weren't thinking it was going to be like it is now. But where we are now, Andy, is that it's happening. It takes a peculiar amount of denial now to argue that it's not happening. It's just the weather. It's always been like this. Places are being wiped out. 6 months of rain is falling in an afternoon and destroying towns. This is only getting worse. And these people lied. They're remote. The amount of money they have taken is beyond our wildest imaginings, because we've allowed our political leaders to create a billionaire class that is beyond imagining, that you couldn't spend in your lifetime. What is it about? So it's not sustainable. This inequality is simply not sustainable in the long run, is it? More and more people are living hand to mouth, week to week, and the rich are so rich that they couldn't spend that money, even if they spent every waking moment of the rest of their life trying to spend it. It's beyond that.
Yeah, I suppose they would describe it as a sensation or frisson of power, like say Musk, who deploys it in various. It was said that he actually bought the election by handing people these giant checks.
Well, he probably he maybe did.
Yeah,
he maybe did. But I don't think people will. I don't think people will find it tolerable in the long run. And maybe they will. Everything suggests from history, though, that actually people have risen up quite frequently over the centuries in response to massive inequalities of power. The only reason we're sitting here together, chatting in our status in life and with anything that resembles tolerable living is because people fought for it for centuries. It wasn't given away willingly.
Exactly. Yeah. So, in a sense, you even think that English suburbia could be on the march over the course of the next years.
It will be interesting to see. I mean, I think it's clear that the notion of a middle class that could rely on its political leaders to assure them that because of their extra qualifications and the status of the job that they got into, that they are allowed to float buoyantly above the pressures that are suffered by the people who are lower down the ladder than them. And I think that's being washed away more and more. That no one has that kind of safety.
Meritocracy.
The question is the question is how divided we are, I suppose, in all our class-ridden manners as to whether people can come together. But I don't think that stability of anything is going to be anything we can rely on in the coming year.
So, as with the release of the Guantanamo prisoners, actually seizing the moment, seizing the day, and however small your dominion,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose what I'm saying is if people have been taking so many things for granted, and actually in so many ways, we can look over decades of certain things remaining constant, of a moderate level of economic stability. I think that we are being assailed by things on such a huge level that so much of it is our creation, not us as individuals.
I think actually Reed
the systems.
A little while ago, Reed said that the part of my job is to have people maintain the sense that they are in some measure prosperous, even if they're not.
Yeah, but that's why.
About that.
But that's why they started off so farcically, because they made it all about growth. It's like, look, it doesn't. We left the EU and damaged our economy in a way that you can't even talk about growth without talking about rejoining the EU. But you also can't really, with a straight face, being from the centre or the centre left, pretend that any of that is possible when climate collapse is happening already on a catastrophic level. We're already in the mitigation phase, but we're not. It's not being acknowledged. Now, I don't expect anything from the far right, but to have a Labour government come in such blatant denial of the reality of just saying these are the most challenging times that any of us have ever lived in, and what we're going to have to do now is we're going to have to be nimble and clever. To do that, we can guarantee ourselves a future that will be less horrendous than, let's just say better. Yeah. It's going to be better than other countries that don't do that. To come in and start giving a load of neoliberal guff about growth and about people deserving their wealth. I mean, it's nonsense. It's absolute empty nonsense.
In the context of what you're so passionately describing, it seems antiquarian, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Yeah.
It does. It's just, and I think that's what people are seeing, and that's what I was saying about they don't have a message, they don't have anything to say to people to inspire them. Nothing. Can you think? Do you remember when Rachel did? Do you remember when Sakia stepped up to the podium and inspired? No, it's like the other side haven't got it either. Sadly, the delusional people who like far-right charlatans think that Nigel Farage has got something to say. I mean, I find him repulsive in the same way that I do Trump. He's not Trump. He hasn't got what Boris Johnson had. That was particularly alarming. I mean, this was the hollowest, most self-serving person you could imagine in a British context. Yeah. And yet people were just there. They give me a flag. Has he got his picture on it? I love him. Thankfully, he's not coming back, but he was our Trump.
Yeah. I think he thought about it, and he said to somebody across the pond this week, well, maybe I was a little bit on the spectrum when I made some of those decisions, which I thought was a masterstroke. I mean...
Johnson said that.
He did.
I mean, you've got to give it to him. He can surprise you by coming out with something.
Yeah.
But no. I mean, the thing was always the same with Johnson, was that Max Clifford, was it? Who had been the editor of the Daily Telegraph.
Oh, Max, I know what you mean.
Max Clifford?
Yeah. So it's not the other one.
When he'd been the editor of the Telegraph, yes. And when Johnson worked there, he was
the EU correspondent,
lazily doing as little as possible and plagiarising as much as possible and being outrageous and and this was before he became the Prime Minister. And he said, you've got to understand, he is the least qualified man to have this job. Johnson is a self-serving buffoon. If you want a maitre d', he is the perfect man. Yeah. If you want somebody to stand up at your do and entertain everybody, he is the least suited person you could find in the entire country.
So you might find your wash is disappearing.
To be in the top position. I mean, that should have been... Yes. That should have done for him. I mean, it really should. But no, because we don't live in reasonable, sensible times anymore. So we like... Enough people like absolute lying, self-seeking charlatans.
Sort of reverse fall guy. He might be a bit neurodiverse. Oh dear.
I'm just imagining that someday he actually gets hauled into a court somewhere and he uses that. He goes, actually, I've just got from Harley Street. I've got this autism assessment that I really.
Who knew? Well, I wonder if he gets away with it at the breakfast table.
Ooh.
You've got to be Boris Johnson. You've got to be into pain, haven't you? And the flying crockery, I would imagine.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, let's not go there. Andy, thank you very much as ever for a fascinating discourse. It leaves me as ever curiously optimistic about what's coming, not least our next conversation, I hope.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot, Andy. I never know how it's going to go either. I think when we spoke last month, it was quite dark. But it's an evolving situation. That's the thing.
Yeah. You remind me of one of the guests on. I depped on the God Slot last couple of summers ago. There's a psychotherapist on. He said, "Do we often notice that so many good things are born in the dark?"
Right.
It's curious, that, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's Rembrandt of life.
Yeah. But I think it's because we're on the cusp of a year where nothing seems that fixed. We're about to get the hand grenade of Donald Trump, which is going to shake things up horribly, but it's going to shake things up. So, and I think all of the geopolitical things that are going on and the economic things, and it's just not. There's no way of regarding this as a stable year. And and what's particularly interesting is. As at some level, the majority of the world's population are really deeply troubled by what's happening in Gaza. At some level, it's a majority. When you ask them in polling, even the Americans, the number of people who are profoundly disturbed by that is actually quite significant. And this is being upheld by our elected leaders who claim to be moderate centrists like Sir Keir Starmer. Something has been very fundamentally broken in the contract between the people and our leadership. And this is everywhere you look in Europe. Just about. I mean, I think I would quite happily go to Ireland or to Spain or Norway, Belgium. That's about it, yeah? Yeah. Where they're not either doing this or talking about building bomb shelters, because apparently Putin, who has never expressed for a moment, any desire to expand into Europe, is apparently a grave existential threat to the existence. It's like, sorry, you just invented that. You just made it up. Now you've got EU officials, high-level officials, talking about how we should all take a cut in our living standards to finance war. And it's like, what war? You made it up. You're inventing it.
Yeah.
It
does imply they're running out of money, doesn't it?
So I think people. Well, yeah, it does. But I think people have seen through it more in numbers that hasn't happened for a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, from our perspective, I suppose I go back to Iraq in 2003, the illegal invasion of Iraq, and how many people opposed that. And remember, this was a war where our co-opted media supported it by about 85%. The British population, I think, at that moment, became pacifist in the majority. Not by much, maybe 52-48, but the number of people who opposed it, vehemently opposed it, was huge. And, and it was psychically destructive what Tony Blair did to us all. He just swatted us aside like a fly.
Yeah.
He was so committed to his illegal crusader adventure.
It's still his legacy.
Totally.
Try as he might airbrush the situation.
But I think that's maybe why I feel something's got to happen. Because, Palestinian activists, of whom there are so many more now than there were a year ago, everybody talks about the mask has fallen.
Yeah.
The mask has fallen and you can't put it back on. And it's not just true of Israel, lying for decades about it being the only democracy in the Middle East and having the most moral army in the world. It's not just Israel, it's all of the people who have been standing shoulder to shoulder with Israel.
So in that you talked about the ripple effect, fascinatingly, in what's going on in Syria and Brexit and the refugee crisis, in a sense there's a ripple effect upcoming here, isn't it? If Israel is bonded to so many of these nations, down these pretenses fall like dominoes.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, we will see.
Yeah. Andy, you're a genius. Thank you. See you next time.